March 15, 1943. 20,000 feet above Germany. Captain James McKenna eased the heavy nose of his P-47 Thunderbolt slightly left and watched the Messerschmitt Bf-109 ahead of him pull into a steep vertical climb. The German pilot clearly believed the fight was already over. From the outside, the assumption made sense. The Thunderbolt looked absurd next to the slim German fighter. Huge, round-bellied, almost comical. 7 tons of aluminum, steel, and engine even before fuel and ammunition. German pilots called it der Amerikanische Schrank, the American wardrobe. Others preferred monster. None said it kindly. The 109 clawed upward, its pilot certain the overweight American couldn't follow. McKenna let him go. He had learned to fly long before the war, dusting crops over Ohio farmland in a battered biplane, feeling lift and momentum in his bones rather than reading about it in manuals. He understood something the German pilot didn't. Weight was not weakness. Weight was energy. McKenna pushed the stick forward. The Thunderbolt dropped like a falling safe. 400 miles per hour. 450. The airframe groaned, but it held. Republic Aviation had built the P-47 like a vault meant to survive explosions. The wind howled around the canopy as the big fighter gained speed faster and faster, momentum stacking like coins in a bank. Then McKenna pulled back, hard. The dive converted into a brutal zoom climb, the Thunderbolt screaming upward on stored energy alone. The massive Pratt & Whitney R-2800 engine thundered as the turbocharger shoved oxygen into 18 cylinders that refused to quit. The Messerschmitt, now near stall speed, hung helplessly in the thin air. McKenna saw the German pilot's face at 50 yards, eyes wide behind goggles, disbelief replacing confidence. He squeezed the trigger. 8.50 caliber Browning machine guns fired as one. The sound wasn't a rattle. It was a single violent note, like the sky tearing open. 3,200 rounds per minute surged forward in a cone of destruction 12 feet wide at combat range. The Messerschmitt did not explode. It came apart. Wings sheared away. The fuselage collapsed. The aircraft simply stopped being an airplane and became fragments tumbling through empty sky. The pilot never had time to react. McKenna flew straight through the debris cloud, aluminum slapping the windscreen like hail. His hands shook, not fear, but the brutal vibration of 8 guns firing at once. The Thunderbolt felt like it had tried to tear itself free of gravity. 3 months earlier, McKenna had thought 6 machine guns on AP-40 were impressive. Now he understood excess. Each Thunderbolt carried 3,200 rounds. Enough ammunition to destroy anything unlucky enough to exist in front of it for more than a second. The radio crackled. Blue leader, 2 more climbing from your 6 low. McKenna rolled inverted and looked down through the canopy. 2 more Bf-109s were clawing upward, still thousands of feet below. In a lighter fighter, he might have worried. In a Thunderbolt, altitude was currency, and he was rich. He eased the nose up, bleeding speed, inviting them closer. The R-2800 rumbled like distant thunder, 2,800 cubic inches of American muscle force fed by a turbocharger that kept delivering power where German engines gasped. At this altitude, the fight already belonged to him. The Germans reached 18,000 feet, engines straining, pilots juggling temperatures and mixture. McKenna had 8,000 feet in hand. He spent it. Rolling inverted again, he pulled into a split S, reversing direction while converting altitude into speed. The Thunderbolt dove past 500 miles per hour. Controls grew heavy, demanding real strength. Early models didn't forgive weakness. McKenna had farmer's arms. The first 109 never saw him. At 100 yards, he fired a half-second burst. 320 rounds tore through the fighter's tail. The rear section separated cleanly, the rest of the aircraft snapping into a flat spin. McKenna saw the pilot fighting the canopy, finally bailing out just before the fuselage detonated. The second German broke left, finally understanding what he faced. McKenna didn't chase. The Thunderbolt did not turn. It punished. He zoom-climbed back to altitude, leaving the surviving fighter to flee. This was the Jug's way: strike from above, annihilate, and disappear before the enemy could answer. The Germans called it unfair. McKenna called it survival. At 22,000 feet, he checked fuel. Enough for 20 more minutes of fighting. Enough to do his job. Blue flight, Form up, he called. Winchester 15. Winchester meant low ammunition. It was a lie, but it gave other flights room to rotate in. The Thunderbolt rarely needed more than 2 seconds of fire per kill. Lieutenant Paul Harrison slid into position beside him, his Thunderbolt marked with nose art, a blonde in a swimsuit and the words Texas Tornado. McKenna's aircraft carried only 7 small swastikas under the canopy rail. After today, there would be more. Below them, the bomber stream pushed onward, B-17s in tight formation, aluminum clouds heading for Germany's industrial heart. The Thunderbolts had broken the fighter attacks before they reached the bombers. This wasn't graceful combat. No turning dances. No chivalry. It was industrial killing at altitude. As they crossed the Dutch coast, McKenna reduced power. The sun dipped low, painting clouds red and gold. Beautiful, if you forgot what was happening inside them. Harrison's voice cut through the calm. Lead, I'm showing low oil pressure. Might have taken flak. McKenna looked over. Black smoke streamed from Harrison's engine. Not fatal yet, but it would be. The black ribbon of oil trailing from Paul Harrison's Thunderbolt thickened as they flew. McKenna knew the signs. The Pratt & Whitney carried 55 gallons of oil, but once a line was ruptured, the clock started ticking. When the oil ran out, the engine would seize. Not sputter, not fade, just stop, sudden and final. Can you make the coast? McKenna asked. Maybe, Harrison answered. His Texas drawl stayed steady, but McKenna heard the strain underneath. England's a no-go. They were still over occupied Holland. If Harrison went down here, he'd either be captured or disappear into a resistance network where survival depended on luck and silence. Neither option promised a quick end. McKenna did the math in his head. 60 miles to water. At their current speed, 15 minutes. Harrison's oil pressure would not last that long. Reduce power, McKenna ordered. Minimum cruise. I'm calling air-sea rescue. He switched frequencies and transmitted the coordinates. The British ran one of the best rescue systems in the war, high-speed boats, flying boats, radar coverage, but even the best system needed time. And Harrison was running out of it. The oil stream worsened. At 40 miles from the coast, Harrison's engine began to shake. At 30, it started missing. At 20, the prop froze solid. The Thunderbolt instantly became a falling object. I'm going to have to jump, Harrison said. Wait, McKenna replied. He slid his Thunderbolt directly ahead of Harrison's disabled fighter, 50 feet in front and slightly below. It was insane. If Harrison drifted even a little, they would collide, 14 tons of aluminum meeting at 200 miles an hour. Match my speed, McKenna said. Stay in my wake. The slipstream hit Harrison's aircraft like an invisible hand. It wasn't much, but it mattered. Harrison's descent rate dropped. Not enough to save him outright, but enough to buy minutes. McKenna flew with microscopic adjustments, holding Harrison in the narrow column of disturbed air behind his propeller. His forearms burned from the constant pressure on the controls. The coast appeared ahead, sand, dunes, gray water beyond. At 2,000 feet, Harrison's Thunderbolt crossed the shoreline. He would reach the sea. Barely. The rescue boat was already charging toward them, a white arrow cutting across dark water. But it was still minutes away. Soon as you hit, get out fast, McKenna warned. That thing's going straight down. Copy, Harrison said. The Thunderbolt struck the water at 120 miles an hour. The nose dug in. The tail flipped. The aircraft cartwheeled and tore itself apart. McKenna watched his friend vanish in spray and debris. Then, movement. A yellow life vest bobbed in the wreckage. McKenna circled, heart hammering, as Harrison struggled to stay afloat. Then he saw the second problem. Harrison's leg was broken, twisted badly. He could barely swim. Twice Harrison slipped under. Twice he came back up. The rescue boat arrived just as Harrison disappeared a third time. 2 sailors dove in without hesitation. Minutes passed that felt like hours. Then Harrison coughed. McKenna waggled his wings and turned west. His fuel gauges were nearly empty. The sun was sinking. He landed in England with barely enough fuel to taxi. That night, he sat in the officers' club with a warm beer and thought about the German pilot from earlier, the one who had climbed away laughing, never knowing how close he'd come to disappearing into the sky. The Thunderbolt wasn't elegant. It didn't dance. It survived. And tomorrow, it would do it again. Black Thursday, October 14th, 1943, ended any illusion that air combat was heroic. McKenna watched bomber after bomber fall out of the sky over Schweinfurt, burning, breaking apart, crews trapped inside. 60 B-17s were lost that day. 600 men. The Thunderbolts fought until their ammunition was gone, then stayed anyway, bluffing German fighters away with empty guns and violent dives. Sometimes presence was enough. Sometimes it wasn't. On January 11th, 1944, McKenna's luck ran out. A Focke-Wulf dropped on him from the sun and tore his Thunderbolt apart before he could react. He bailed out through fire and ice, landing in a frozen field and spending the rest of the war as a prisoner. When he returned home, medals followed, but peace did not. The 8 guns that had saved his life had also taken dozens of others. The Germans had laughed at the Thunderbolt until they learned what 3,400 rounds per minute could do.